Most people think toxic people are obvious. They imagine yelling, insults, or blatant disrespect. But the most dangerous toxic people don't look like villains at all. They look like friends, partners, family members, people who mean well. They don't destroy your life overnight. They do it gradually by eroding your confidence, blurring your boundaries, and keeping you emotionally off balance. And that's why so many intelligent, self-aware people stay around them far longer than they should, because toxicity isn't always abuse. Sometimes it's subtle misalignment. Sometimes it's emotional manipulation wrapped in concern. Sometimes it's someone who drains your future while pretending to support your present. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If someone consistently makes you feel confused, small, anxious, or exhausted, that is not love. That is not loyalty. That is not normal. It's conditioning. In this video, we're breaking down types of toxic people who quietly sabotage your growth, your peace, and your sense of self, often without realizing it themselves. This isn't about labeling people as bad. It's about recognizing patterns. Because once you can name the pattern, you can stop participating in it. And the moment you stop giving toxic people access to your energy, your life starts to change fast. Let's begin. Before we dive in, I want to share something personal. I get a lot of messages from people who feel surrounded by fake friends, constant drama, or emotional chaos. And they just want a place to be real. That's why I created a Patreon community, a private space where you can open up, share what you're going through, and get my personal insights. It's also where you can request specific video topics. If there's something you're struggling with that you want me to break down here on the channel, if you're serious about growth, peace, and self-awareness, you'll fit right in. The link is below. Now, let's get into it. Here are things fake people always say and the hidden truth behind each one. 1. The insecure projector. The insecure projector is one of the most dangerous types of toxic people. Not because they are powerful, but because they are deeply afraid. This person doesn't attack you openly. They reflect themselves onto you. Everything they secretly dislike about who they are, they accuse you of being. Their jealousy becomes your arrogance. Their dishonesty becomes your untrustworthiness. Their lack of discipline becomes your laziness. Their fear of being exposed becomes your bad intentions. Psychologically, this is called projection, a defense mechanism where the mind offloads unbearable traits onto someone else to avoid confronting them internally. But when you're on the receiving end, it doesn't feel theoretical. It feels confusing, disorienting, undermining, and over time it can quietly dismantle your sense of self. How projection actually works. The insecure projector lives in constant inner conflict. They feel inferior but want to appear superior, uncertain but crave control, inadequate but desperate for validation. Instead of resolving this tension internally, they externalize it. They scan their environment for someone who is growing, is confident, is emotionally stable, or simply mirrors a version of who they wish they were. And then unconsciously, they assign their inner flaws to that person. You become the container for everything they refuse to face. This is why projection often targets emotionally intelligent, capable, or self-aware people. Your clarity threatens their denial. What it feels like to be around them. At first, the insecure projector doesn't seem toxic. They may even appear insightful, honest, direct, concerned for your well-being, but slowly something feels off. They question your motives when you haven't done anything wrong. They accuse you of emotions you're not feeling. They react defensively to neutral behavior. They interpret your boundaries as attacks. You start hearing things like, you think you're better than everyone. You're trying to manipulate people. You're selfish. You're fake. You can't be trusted. What makes this especially damaging is that they say it with certainty. And if you're introspective, empathetic, or self-reflective, you might pause and think, wait, am I? That moment of self-doubt is where the damage begins. Why they target you specifically? Insecure projectors don't project onto everyone. They choose people who have strong inner direction, aren't desperate for approval, set boundaries, or are quietly becoming more confident. Your stability exposes their instability. your progress highlights their stagnation. Your calm makes their chaos visible. So instead of evolving, they attempt to reframe reality by redefining you as the problem. If they can convince themselves and others that you're flawed, dangerous, or arrogant, they don't have to change. The slow psychological erosion. The real harm of the insecure projector is not the accusations themselves. It's the internalization. Over time, you may over-explain yourself, walk on eggshells, second-guess your intentions, shrink your personality, soften your boundaries, feel guilty for things you didn't do. You start managing their emotions at the cost of your own clarity. And the more you defend yourself, the more power they gain. Because projection feeds on engagement. They don't want truth. They want relief from their inner discomfort. Why confrontation rarely works? Trying to reason with an insecure projector is like arguing with someone's shadow. They are not responding to you. They are responding to themselves. If you calmly explain your intentions, they hear manipulation. If you assert boundaries, they hear control. If you disengage, they accuse you of avoidance or guilt. No amount of evidence will convince someone who is defending their ego rather than seeking truth. This is why many people feel exhausted after interacting with insecure projectors. They are fighting a battle that was never about facts. The Stoic insight. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. Epictetus taught that people are disturbed not by events but by their judgments about events. The insecure projector lives trapped inside distorted judgments about themselves and therefore about you. Marcus Aurelius warned, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. In other words, their behavior reveals their inner state, not your worth. How to protect yourself? The solution is not confrontation. It's non-participation. You protect yourself by not defending against false accusations. Not explaining your character to someone committed to misunderstanding you. Not absorbing emotional blame that isn't yours. Not trying to be seen correctly by someone who benefits from seeing you incorrectly. Instead, observe patterns. Maintain calm distance. Anchor your identity internally, not in their perception. The moment you stop reacting, projection loses its target. The hard truth. Insecure projectors don't ruin your life by overpowering you. They do it by getting inside your head. They win when you doubt yourself, when you suppress your growth, when you trade inner clarity for external approval. But the moment you recognize projection for what it is, their influence collapses because clarity is the one thing insecurity cannot survive. Closing reflection. If someone consistently accuses you of traits you've never embodied, if they seem threatened by your calm, your growth, or your independence, if their criticism says more about their fears than your behavior, you're not the problem. You're the mirror they didn't want to look into. And the most powerful response is not anger. It's distance. 2. The constant critic. The constant critic rarely raises their voice. They don't always insult you directly. In fact, they often claim they are helping you, but over time, their presence rewires how you see yourself. This person finds something wrong with nearly everything you do. Not loudly, not cruel at first, but consistently. A comment here, a correction there, a suggestion you didn't ask for, and slowly you begin to feel like you're always falling short. What makes the constant critic so dangerous? Criticism isn't toxic by itself. Constructive feedback can be healthy. The constant critic, however, isn't interested in growth. They are interested in control through erosion. They position themselves as more experienced, more aware, more realistic, more honest so that you start deferring to their judgment instead of your own. Their power doesn't come from being right. It comes from being persistent. How they operate. The constant critic works in patterns, not outbursts. They point out flaws faster than strengths. Notice mistakes but ignore effort. Frame opinions as facts. Deliver critiques even when nothing is asked. Rarely acknowledge improvement. Their tone may sound calm, rational, even caring, but the message is always the same: you're not quite enough. And when you succeed, They often respond with, "You could have done better. Let's see if it lasts." Anyone could do that. Here's what you still need to fix. Your wins never get to stand on their own. Why they do it at the core. The constant critic is uncomfortable with equality. Your confidence threatens their sense of relevance. By keeping you in a state of self-doubt, they maintain psychological leverage. Sometimes this comes from deep insecurity. Perfectionism projected outward, fear of being outgrown, a need to feel superior, learned behavior from critical environments. They may not consciously intend to harm you, but intent doesn't reduce impact. What it feels like to be around them. Being around a constant critic creates a low-level anxiety that's hard to name. You might notice that you rehearse conversations in advance, over-prepare to avoid mistakes, apologize unnecessarily, hesitate before sharing ideas, feel tense around them. Even when things are fine, you begin to filter yourself. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system has learned that expression equals evaluation. The internal damage. The most serious harm happens inside you. Over time, their voice becomes internalized. You start critiquing yourself before others can, dismissing your achievements, expecting disapproval, raising your standards to punishing levels, feeling uneasy when things go well. This is how confidence erodes without obvious abuse. You don't feel attacked. You feel insufficient. Why arguing back doesn't help? Defending yourself against a constant critic often backfires. If you explain yourself, they criticize your explanation. If you improve, they raise the bar. If you push back, they accuse you of being defensive or immature. Because the critique was never about accuracy. It was about maintaining authority, and authority requires you to keep doubting yourself. The Stoic perspective. The Stoics warned against surrendering your self-worth to external judgment. Epictetus taught that if you seek approval, you hand your peace to others. The constant critic thrives on this exchange. They become the silent judge and you become the one waiting for a verdict that never arrives. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. The critic's power exists only if their opinion becomes your truth. How to protect yourself. You don't protect yourself by becoming flawless. You protect yourself by becoming grounded. That means separating feedback from identity. Not responding to unsolicited critique. Setting limits on evaluative conversations. Acknowledging effort, not just outcomes. Validating yourself internally. Sometimes protection also means distance. Because constant criticism is not mentorship. It's a slow withdrawal of emotional safety. Draw the line. You should never cross the moment when criticism outnumbers encouragement, makes you feel smaller not stronger, creates fear instead of clarity, feels chronic rather than situational. It stops being helpful. And when someone repeatedly reduces you to what you lack, they are not invested in your growth. They are invested in your insecurity. Closing reflection. A healthy relationship challenges you and supports you. The constant critic only challenges. They point, evaluate, correct, but never truly stand beside you. If someone's presence makes you doubt your worth more than your actions ever did, that's not honesty. That's toxicity in a quiet voice. And you are allowed to step away. 3. The fair weather friend. The fair weather friend doesn't betray you loudly. They don't insult you. They don't create drama. They simply vanish when you need them most. At first, they seem easygoing, fun, supportive, even loyal. They show up when life is light, when things are going well, when there's something to enjoy, gain, or celebrate. But the moment life becomes heavy, the moment you struggle, the moment you need consistency instead of entertainment, they disappear. And that absence leaves a deeper wound than open conflict ever could. Why fair weather friends are so dangerous. Human beings are wired for attachment. We don't just bond through happiness. We bond through shared difficulty. The fair weather friend breaks this bond without explanation. They train your nervous system to associate vulnerability with abandonment. You stop reaching out. You stop sharing honestly. You stop expecting support and eventually you stop trusting connection itself. That's the real damage. How they show up in your life. The fair weather friend is present when you're successful, confident, entertaining, emotionally regulated, useful. They laugh with you. They hype you up. They call often. But when you experience stress, loss, burnout, uncertainty, emotional depth, their availability collapses. Messages go unanswered, plans fall apart, excuses multiply. Not because they are busy, but because they are uncomfortable. The psychology behind the behavior. Fair weather friends are not always malicious. Many are emotionally underdeveloped. They avoid discomfort, fear emotional responsibility, struggle with empathy under pressure, prioritize their own regulation over connection. They want friendship without emotional cost, enjoyment without obligation, connection without commitment. But real friendship demands presence. Not just during peaks, but during valleys. The subtle gaslighting. One of the most painful aspects of a fair weather friend is the confusion they create. When you finally notice the pattern, you may hear, "I didn't know you needed me. You never said anything. I've just been busy. You're asking for too much." They frame your need for consistency as unreasonable. You begin to wonder if you're being needy when in reality you're responding to asymmetry. They take emotional access when it suits them, but disappear when you ask for reciprocity. Why you stay longer than you should? Fair weather friendships often last far longer than openly toxic ones. Why? Because they are good memories. Because they are laughs, because it feels wrong to cut someone off who isn't actively cruel. You hold on to the idea of who they are, not the pattern of who they consistently show themselves to be, and hope becomes the glue. The long-term emotional cost. Over time, fair weather friendships condition you to self-abandon. You start minimizing your struggles, sharing only positive updates, carrying pain alone, becoming the strong one, believing your emotions are burdens. You don't want to risk being left again. So you perform strength instead of asking for support. This is how loneliness grows, even in company. Why confrontation rarely changes them. When confronted, fair weather friends often react defensively. They may downplay your feelings, accuse you of being dramatic, promise to do better, temporarily return only when things improve, but without emotional capacity, behavior doesn't sustain. Consistency requires discomfort tolerance, and that's exactly what they lack. The Stoic lens. Stoic philosophy valued character over charm. Epictetus reminded us that we should judge people by what they do when circumstances are difficult, not easy. Anyone can show up for joy. Loyalty reveals itself under weight. A person who disappears during hardship has shown you the limits of their character, not your worth. How to protect yourself. Protection doesn't require anger. It requires adjusted expectations. That means stop confiding deeply in those who vanish under pressure. Reserve vulnerability for proven consistency. Observe behavior, not promises. Invest energy where it's returned. And sometimes it means letting go quietly, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. The hard truth. Fair weather friends don't leave because you're struggling. They leave because your struggle confronts them with emotional depth they can't handle. Your pain isn't the problem. They are avoidances. Closing reflection. Friendship isn't measured by laughter alone. It's measured by presence when the mood drops, the mask falls, and the situation gets real. Anyone who only knows you at your best doesn't truly know you at all. And anyone who abandons you in difficulty has already answered the most important question. Believe them. 4. The emotional withholder. The emotional withholder doesn't attack you. They don't shout. They don't stir. They simply pull away at the exact moment you need connection most. Affection becomes conditional. Attention becomes unpredictable. Warmth turns on and off without explanation. And slowly you begin chasing what used to be freely given. What emotional withholding really is. Emotional withholding is the deliberate or learned refusal to provide emotional responsiveness. This includes affection, validation, reassurance, presence, vulnerability not as a boundary but as a tool, whether consciously or not. The emotional withholder uses absence to regulate power. They decide when closeness is allowed, how it shows up. At first everything feels normal. They may even be warm, attentive, and emotionally available. Then something shifts. You notice patterns like they go quiet after you express a need. They withdraw affection after conflict. They become distant when you're vulnerable. They respond with cold neutrality instead of care. They reward compliance with closeness. You're left wondering what changed and what you did wrong. Why this is so psychologically damaging. Human attachment relies on emotional consistency. The emotional withholder destabilizes this system by alternating between warmth and withdrawal. They create anxiety, hypervigilance, self-doubt, emotional dependency. This pattern mirrors intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. You don't know when connection will return, so you keep trying. The inner dialogue they create over time. Their behavior reshapes your thinking. You may find yourself asking, did I ask for too much? Maybe I'm too emotional. If I stay calm, they'll come back. I just need to be more understanding. You begin shrinking your needs to preserve the relationship. And that's the trap. Why they withhold? Not all emotional withholders are intentionally manipulative. Many learn this pattern early. Common roots include emotional neglect in childhood, fear of vulnerability, avoidant attachment, control through distance, over-identification with independence. They equate closeness with loss of control. So they ration intimacy instead of sharing it. The power dynamic. Emotional withholding creates an unspoken hierarchy. They become the regulator. You become the seeker. They decide when conversations happen, when affection returns, when things are okay again. You wait, and waiting erodes self-trust. Why confrontation feels impossible? When you try to address it, they often respond with, I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. You're imagining things. I just need space. Your experience is dismissed without discussion. And because there's no visible conflict, you feel unjustified in your pain. But absence can hurt just as much as aggression. The Stoic perspective. Stoicism values emotional discipline but not emotional deprivation. Marcus Aurelius wrote about meeting others with rational kindness, not calculated distance. Withholding is not strength. It's avoidance disguised as control. True composure doesn't punish others with silence. How emotional withholding changes you. If you stay too long, you may notice anxiety around expressing needs, fear of upsetting them, overanalysis of tone and timing, relief when they return followed by dread, loss of emotional spontaneity. You become careful instead of authentic. That's not love. That's survival. How to protect yourself. Protection begins with clarity. You name the pattern. Then you stop chasing connection. Stop earning affection. Stop apologizing for needs. Stop negotiating for basic responsiveness. You cannot force emotional availability. But you can choose environments where it's natural. The hard truth. Someone who withholds connection to maintain control is not emotionally safe, no matter how calm they appear. Consistency is not a luxury. It's the foundation of secure relationships. Closing reflection. Love doesn't require guessing. Care doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable. Anyone who teaches you to suppress your emotional truth to stay connected is not offering connection at all. They are offering access on their terms, and you are allowed to want more. 5. The passive-aggressive. The passive-aggressive person doesn't confront you. They punish you quietly. There are no clear accusations, no open fights, no direct statements you can respond to. Instead, there's sarcasm, delay, withholding, jokes, silence that feels heavier than words. And because nothing is said outright, you're left carrying the confusion alone. What passive aggression really is. Passive aggression is hostility disguised as harmlessness. It's anger that refuses to speak directly, but still wants to be felt. Rather than expressing resentment openly, the passive-aggressive person releases it sideways through tone, through omission, through subtle sabotage, through plausible deniability. They want you to feel the impact without giving you something you can confront. How it shows up in everyday life. Passive aggression is built from patterns, not incidents. You may notice backhanded compliments, "I was just joking," comments that sting, chronic lateness when it matters to you, deliberate forgetfulness, cold politeness after disagreement, help offered but done poorly, silent treatment framed as needing space. Nothing is severe enough to point at. Everything is severe enough to feel. Why it's so psychologically damaging? The danger of passive aggression isn't the behavior, it's the ambiguity. Narcissistic charm is not random. It's calculated attunement. They study you. They notice what excites you, what you're insecure about, what you long to be understood for. Then they reflect it back to you with precision. You hear things like, "I've never met anyone like you. You're different from other people. I feel like I can be myself with you. We're the same." This creates instant emotional intensity. But intensity is not intimacy. Why it feels so powerful? The narcissistic charmer activates your attachment system. They give focused attention, excessive validation, emotional mirroring, future-oriented language. This is known as idealization. Your nervous system reads it as connection, but psychologically it's closer to seduction through reflection. You fall in love with how you feel around them before you actually know them. The shift you don't see coming. At some point, the warmth fades, not suddenly, strategically. Affection becomes inconsistent. Validation becomes conditional. Attention must now be earned. This is where devaluation begins. Small criticisms slip in. Boundaries are tested. Your needs are minimized. But because of the earlier intensity, you interpret this shift as your fault. You try harder. The control mechanism. The narcissistic charmer maintains dominance through contrast. They alternate between praise and withdrawal, intimacy and distance, approval and disapproval. This keeps you emotionally off balance. Jealousy in friendship rarely looks like rage. It looks like awkward silence after good news. Subtle mood shifts when you succeed. Jokes that minimize your wins. Backhanded compliments. Competition where none is needed. They don't confront you. They compete with you internally, and you feel it before you can explain it. Why this hurts so much? Friendship is built on mutual uplift. So when someone close to you feels threatened by your growth, it cuts deeper than envy from a stranger. You expect support. You get tension. You expect celebration. You get distance. And the emotional whiplash makes you question whether you're allowed to shine. The psychology behind the jealous friend. Jealous friends struggle with relative self-worth. They don't evaluate themselves internally. They evaluate themselves against you. Your progress becomes evidence of their stagnation. Instead of addressing that discomfort, they redirect it outward toward you. Common roots include low self-esteem, fear of being left behind, identity built on comparison, scarcity mindset, unresolved competitiveness. They measure worth vertically, not individually. How they undermine you subtly. The jealous friend rarely attacks directly. Instead, they downplay your achievements. Change the subject when you succeed. Offer discouraging advice. Highlight risks instead of possibilities. Question your choices under the guise of concern. I'm just being realistic. I don't want you to get hurt. Are you sure you're ready for that? Doubt replaces encouragement. Why you start shrinking? Over time, you may notice yourself sharing less about your goals, softening your wins, making yourself smaller to keep harmony, avoiding topics that trigger tension. You begin protecting their feelings at the cost of your authenticity. And that's where damage sets in. When jealousy turns toxic. Jealousy becomes toxic when it's unacknowledged and unmanaged. At this stage, the friend may celebrate your failures quietly, compare themselves loudly, compete in areas that don't make sense, seek validation at your expense, side with others against you. The friendship shifts from mutual support to silent rivalry. Why confrontation is tricky? If you address it, they often deny it. They say, I'm happy for you. You're imagining things. Why would I be jealous? Because admitting jealousy would require vulnerability and they're not ready for that. So the tension remains unresolved. The Stoic perspective. Stoicism teaches that comparison is the thief of peace. A jealous friend has surrendered inner stability to external ranking. Marcus Aurelius warned against letting others' insecurity dictate your path. Your growth is not an attack. It is simply movement. How to protect yourself? You protect yourself by staying grounded in your own lane. That means not dimming your light, not over-explaining your success, not seeking validation from someone threatened by it. Limiting emotional disclosure if patterns persist. True friends grow with you, not against you. The hard truth. Someone who resents your growth cannot fully support your future. They may care about you, but care mixed with envy is unstable. Love doesn't compete. Closing reflection. Pay attention to who celebrates you when you win without hesitation, without comparison. Those people are rare. And anyone who makes you feel guilty for becoming more of yourself is not walking beside you. They're watching from behind. 8. The chaos creator. The chaos creator thrives where stability exists. They don't always yell. They don't always attack. Sometimes they appear fun, energetic, even exciting. But beneath the surface lies a simple pattern: they cannot tolerate calm. Where others build order, they sow disruption. Where others seek resolution, they manufacture tension. Where others find peace, they start storms. And over time, living near a chaos creator doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels mentally and emotionally exhausting. The nature of chaos. Chaos creators are not always consciously malicious. Some are drawn to drama because it gives them a sense of power. Others are addicted to the adrenaline of conflict. What they all share is this: they operate best when the environment around them is unpredictable. This unpredictability gives them control. Not through direct domination, but through instability itself. In essence, if you feel unsteady around them, that's exactly how they want it. How they show up. Chaos creators are deceptively versatile. Some behaviors you might notice include creating conflicts between others, then standing back to watch, spreading rumors or half-truths, interrupting calm or productive moments with drama, refusing to resolve small issues, letting tension fester, shifting moods erratically, keeping others on edge, exaggerating minor problems into crisis. Notice the pattern. Their chaos is strategic, not random. It always serves to keep attention, control, or emotional power in their favor. Why they are so mentally draining. Living around chaos creators rewires your nervous system. You start hyperanalyzing their words and actions. Rehearsing conversations to avoid sparks. Second-guessing yourself constantly. Feeling emotionally depleted after interactions. Calm becomes suspicious. Predictability becomes impossible. Even when nothing overtly happens, you feel tired because your mind is constantly anticipating the next disruption. Psychologically, this is exhausting because your brain operates in a state of low-level vigilance, which is stressful and mentally costly over time. The psychology behind chaos creation. Chaos creators are often rooted in their own unresolved inner turmoil. They may have high anxiety they externalize, a deep need for attention, insecurity about their ability to maintain relationships, a compulsive fear of boredom or irrelevance, difficulty regulating emotions. Drama is their tool for externalizing internal unrest. It is not always conscious. Sometimes they simply replicate patterns they learned in childhood. If conflict, instability, or tension was how they got attention or felt alive growing up, they now unconsciously reproduce it. The control mechanism. Chaos creators control not by telling you what to do, but by controlling the emotional atmosphere. Your responses to the chaos, frustration, anxiety, overreaction, become their leverage. They can observe silently while you expend energy navigating the storm. In other words, the chaos itself is their power. Your reactions are their rewards. They feed on your attention, confusion, and emotional labor. Subtle manipulation techniques. Not all chaos is loud. Often, it's quietly destabilizing, which makes it harder to recognize. Deliberate miscommunication or omission of facts. creating unnecessary pressure for decisions. Pitting people against each other subtly. Overreacting to minor issues to keep everyone tense. Using crises as opportunities to highlight themselves. Notice a common thread: they make normal life feel unstable. You start questioning your perceptions, doubting your decisions, and trying to anticipate drama that shouldn't exist. What it feels like to be around them. If you've ever had a chaos creator in your life, you may recognize feeling drained after even brief encounters, constantly monitoring moods, schedules, or conversations, anxiety that seems to come from nowhere, difficulty relaxing even in calm environments, a sense that nothing is ever fully safe or resolved. Living with a chaos creator is like standing in the eye of a storm that moves unpredictably. You never know which way the wind will hit next. Why confrontation often fails. Confronting a chaos creator directly rarely works. If you assert boundaries, they may escalate the chaos. If you remain calm, they may become bored and invent new disturbances. If you avoid reacting, they may interpret it as weakness or lack of attention. The key insight: chaos creators are less interested in resolution than they are in stimulation. They thrive on the emotional energy that turbulence produces. Your peace is not their goal. The Stoic perspective. The Stoics teach detachment and inner stability. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. Chaos creators force you to test this principle. You cannot control their behavior, but you can control your response. Your calm becomes your weapon, your detachment your shield, your boundaries your fortress. Chaos creators lose power the moment you refuse to feed it. The long-term damage if unchecked. Chaos creators can cause serious long-term consequences, eroding your confidence in judgment and decision-making, teaching you to over-accommodate or overreact, increasing chronic stress and anxiety, shaping patterns of over-vigilance in relationships, distracting you from goals and priorities. Their effect isn't always dramatic. It's cumulative. You may look back years later and realize how much mental energy was consumed just keeping things stable around them. How to protect yourself. Protection begins with recognition. Identify patterns of manufactured drama. Observe how your nervous system reacts, not just your mind. Separate intention from behavior. Realize that chaos often says more about them than you. Reduce engagement with needless disruptions. Set firm boundaries around attention, energy, and emotional labor. Sometimes protection requires distance, not out of anger, but to preserve your internal equilibrium. The hard truth. Chaos creators don't need to be openly malicious to be toxic. They don't need to insult, manipulate, or attack directly. They just need access. Access to your attention, energy, and emotional stability. And over time, that access quietly erodes your inner peace, confidence, and focus. Closing reflection. You can't change a chaos creator. But you can choose your response. Calmness disarms them. Boundaries limit their reach. Observation without overreaction neutralizes the power they seek. And the moment you stop feeding the storm begins to dissipate. Peace is not given by the world. It's claimed by those who refuse to participate in chaos. 9. The chronic victim. The chronic victim doesn't need to hurt you directly. They only need to draw.